I'm Rich Schmidt, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Horseshoe Bend Dig. And fortunately, this was something that I uncovered literally just in my backyard. A little bit about me. I'm an amateur archaeologist, amateur historian, but I did bring a professional here in case there's any hard questions. Normally, let's see. Oops, sorry, buttons are. Normally, I run a medical device company. This is my day job, so I give a lot of presentations, but they're usually, a little bit different than the one I'm going to give today. The company that I run, we develop surgical tools for liver cancer patients. And if that's interesting to you, I can talk to you about that. But today, we're going to talk about the Horseshoe Bend Dig. And so for the purpose of this talk, I'm just a guy who found some interesting stuff in his backyard. The project is ongoing, so you're going to see a lot of interesting things, but also a lot of loose ends. We're working on tying some information together through historical records. Some things we've figured out, some things we haven't yet, but at least we've spent enough time on the project that there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. So the whole project really started back in about 2005 when my wife and I, my wife wave? There she is, okay. So we bought this land in Verona. I had lived in Belleville for about 25 years, and my son Bryce lived in Belleville, we grew up there. And we moved to this place in Verona, and everybody you see in this picture here actually plays a little part in the story. My in-laws, Paul and Katie, there's Bryce in there. And this little guy here is now a varsity high school wrestler. And this little guy here just started his first year of college at the University of Minnesota. So, we looked at this place in Verona for about 5 years, and you know how every spring, you get the mower out, and there's weeds all over, and you start mowing, and you think, I'm really going to clean up the yard. So I drive the mower down the hill. We've got about 3.5 acres, mostly wooded, and I drive the mower down the hill, and there was always this area, one little tiny area that had cattails in it, which is kind of odd. And I'd get too close to that with the mower, and the mower would sink up to exhaust axles in mud. And so it took me some time and some colorful language to get it out. But then when I did, I would go mow the rest of the yard and say, well, I'm not going to do that again. And then the next spring, I would go down the hill and I'd say, I'm going to mow that area down by the cattails, and I'd get the mower stuck again. So embarrassingly, I did this about 4 times. But the last time that I did this, I brought a shovel with me, and I thought, maybe there's a spring or something down there that might be interesting to look at. So we'll get to that in a minute. This is an overview of what I'm going to cover today. So we moved in about 5 years later, explored the cattail areas and found a well, and so spent the remaining years excavating this well, which is kind of interesting. Then for reasons which will become clear in a minute, I bought a metal detector. Wasn't intending to, but did. And then found the first old artifact. This is about a 150-year-old wick adjuster for an oil lamp. Later on, surveyed the lower part of the yard down by where the cattails are, and found nails and bricks and things, and we'll cover that in detail. And then spent a lot of time, weekend discretionary time playing around down there on my hands and knees in the dirt. Then we started doing document searches, and let's see, Dawn Stencil, can you wave? Dawn is one of my coworkers, and she has a real passion for genealogy and historical records research, and she's done an amazing amount of work and helped me to really piece together some of the puzzles that we've located. A lot of work on the lower site, and then at some point we figured out there was actually 2 building sites on our land, so a real bonus, and started looking around for that site as well. And then more recently, we've done an east wall search with Paul Reckner, and a couple of his colleagues came out to help us try and find out some things about the site, and we actually uncovered more mysteries than answers that day, which just means, well, the project's going to be more interesting and longer, so nothing wrong with that, really. So that's the overview. So the site location, you can see, is here. This is Highway PB. The dog park is about a mile north up here. In case people still don't know where we are, this is Old Duffer's Pub. People have heard of Old Duffer's Pub? Okay. Just want to make sure. So that's the site location. If we zoom in, this is our yard, basically. You can see that there is This is the area where the well is located, right next to Highway PB. This is what we're calling the Fuller site. Fuller is the first recorded landowner. He had a land patent back in 1851, Don? Okay. And then this is what we're calling the McDonald site. The census and plat map from 1890 shows a building location up in this area, which was a kind of a surprise to us. So looking at the site from Highway PB, looking towards the west, you're looking up the hill towards where our house is. This is the Fuller site location. You can see the well is circled there, and then the McDonald site is up past those trees. Yeah, this is a part of the story where my memory is good. It's just short. So I mowed down there every year. Got the mower stuck in the mud, and then about the fourth time I did that, I brought a shovel with me, and was surprised to find once I stuck the shovel in the ground that there was actually the first thing I hit was a wood timber. This is actually one of the wood timbers, and the surprising thing was that we found about 6 of these timbers, but 2 of them had hole, a circular hole, just like that. Right? Some of you might recognize this as a place where you might mount a pump. So, in addition to the timbers that we uncovered there, we also found a pump, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. This is Paul and Zach. You can see that they're a little bit older than they were in the first picture, about 5 years older. And we spent a lot of weekends down there at the well digging. And of course, for young boys playing in the mud, digging in a well, it's sort of like your own personal search for One-Eyed Willie's treasure or the Curse of Oak Island in Verona. So the first thing that we found out was that if you dig on the well on Saturday, when you go back on Sunday, it's full of water because it's a well. Okay, so, duh, right? So the next thing we had to figure out was, okay, we want to keep digging on this thing, we have to pump it out, right? So then it's, bring a gasoline-powered generator down there and a submersible sump pump and a bunch of PVC pipe, and you throw that down in the well and you pump the water. And it takes about 15 minutes, and we can completely empty the well, and then we could dig on it. So when you first start digging on the well, you can start at the top with shovels, but because the well is only about 2.5, 3 feet wide, it's pretty hard to swing a shovel in there. And so we dug with shovels from the top, and then we dig with post hole diggers, and then eventually, well, they're not my kids, so I could send the kids down the well and send them down there with a bucket and a trowel. I was like, get that mud out of there. And they were pretty good sports about it most of the time. So that worked pretty well. And then later, you can see the thing in the bottom here is actually, this is a full-size post hole digger, and I made this clever scissors extension, and I made a sort of an accordion type scissors extension, fancy modified post hole digger, and that's how we got down about 13 feet in the well. So you can see there's a bucket at the bottom, right down here, and you pick up the mud, you drop it in the bucket, and then you haul the bucket up, and then you look in the bucket and you go, oh my God, there's going to be treasure in here, right? And you find a bunch of slimy mud and sometimes some rusted iron that it just looks like this. It's all orange colored and there's really nothing left there. We have found in the well, right near the top, one fork, which looks like it's probably like 1950s, and from further down the well we found one hammer, and that's pretty much it for the well. But there may be a reason for that, and I'll get to that later. So this is what the well cross-section looks like right now. The interesting thing is that this upper part here is concrete, and it's concrete for about 8 feet down. And then there's a section down here that's all stacked stones. They're stacked roughly in a circle. And then there's mud at the bottom. And we think that what happened at some point is that the upper part of the well became unstable. The rocks started to fall in the bottom, and whoever was there at the time wanted to preserve the well, and so they put this concrete form in the top to preserve the well. And so the well is actually quite stable mechanically at this point, but we think that what's in the bottom here of the well is actually the stones from the top. So, the well is an area of of lots of activity. It's the center point of a lot of activities, and so the thought, the dream, the hope was that at some point we would get to the bottom of the well and maybe find some coins or something that will help us to establish date. But I think the only way to do that is to actually find a way to get these stones out of the bottom of the well. And because it's down so far, it's really not safe to send your stepchildren down there anymore. So I'm going to come up with a different idea for that. But I actually have, let's see, some videos of the well. Paul's not here, so I can show that video of him. So we're pumping out the well. And now I'm gonna take you on a little tour of the well. And we're gonna take you. And I have to be careful because one of my stepsons used some rather colorful language during the recording of one of these videos, so I'm gonna just turn the volume down. I haven't edited this sound here. All right, so here I am going down the well. And this is before we got down as far as we are. This is only about the 11-foot point. This is a concrete form. You can see you can see some stacked rocks down there and some mud and some water. And stepchildren on the outside of the well. And then a couple years later, we got a little bit further down the well. You see there's snow on the ground there. It's, we're pretty aggressive sometimes. And Zach decided that, we had taken a metal detector on a long pole and stuck it down there. We know that there's some metal targets down there. And Zach was bound and determined. He's like, I'm going to go down there and find those. And so we got dressed up, and he crawled down to the bottom of the well and poked around in the mud for about 2 hours. And it's just all stacked boulders, and the metal targets, whatever they are, it's probably a nut or a bolt or a piece of a tractor or something. They're underneath the boulders at the bottom of the well, so there's nothing there for us to see right now. So early on, one of the first things I found right alongside these timbers was part of a reciprocating pump, and this is how one of these pumps typically was used. There's a reciprocating rod that goes down the center of the pump. There's a piston inside the pump, and this is the actual pump that we found. I actually sectioned it on my saw. I'll show you how it looks. Here's the pump. You can see there's a check valve in the bottom here, and this is a movable piston. It can be pushed up and down either by the hand on this hand pump, or sometimes these were also used with a windmill with an offset crankshaft and a vertical rod. So this is the actual pump that was used at this well. And interestingly, check valve. The back side of this says air motor, Chicago. This was one of the companies that used to build pumps for windmills and things back in the 1800s. That company's actually around still, but they're not making that kind of pump anymore. Okay, so. Oh yeah, another interesting thing about the well, this is sort of what it looks like now. Well, not actually today because there's snow on the ground, but if there were no snow, it would look something like this. We made a little cover for it so that stepchildren don't fall in the well. And this tree wasn't actually there when we moved in. My wife planted that tree there because it was so wet in that area. This is before we found the well. And so she planted this pussy willow tree because how wet it was down there. It's funny how all these things fit together. So next chapter of the story is how I bought a metal detector. My son Bryce and I normally don't hunt together, but we both love to go bow hunting, but in different places. And one year we decided it's the last day of deer hunting season. Let's hunt together. And so he drove his truck over to my house, and he parked where I normally park my truck, and I parked my truck somewhere else. We went hunting, walking through Brooklyn Wildlife Area, which is like over 2,000 acres. Tracked one deer for a while, came back, didn't get anything, but there's worse things than spending the day walking around with your son in the woods, right? So we came back, and I tried getting in the house, and I'm like, Bryce, I lost my keys. So we're thinking, where could I have lost my keys, right? So immediately you think, well, there's 2,000 acres of Brooklyn Wildlife Area out there, in a frozen marsh, and it's snowing. So I went out there the next day with a rake and went through the parking area. Did not find my keys, then started walking through the woods thinking, boy, this is really fruitless. Yeah, so I didn't find my keys, believe it or not, and came home, and after spending about a week agonizing over this and looking everywhere I could think of to try and find my keys, I think about the fourth person that said to me, just buy a metal detector. I said, okay, I'll buy a metal detector because, I got to find my keys, right? So, they don't really sell metal detectors for finding keys. They usually have a number of things that they're good for, and I figured, well, jewelry is close to keys, right? So I'll buy one of these. So I bought this metal detector, reasoning that I would use for jewelry hunting, but actually it turns out this would be my primary relic hunting tool. So I was trying to be proactive about this. It was going to arrive like on a Thursday morning, and so Wednesday night I download the manual from the internet, study the whole thing cover to cover, so when this thing arrives, I can just put the batteries in, I'm ready to rock and roll, I'm going to go out, find my keys, and I can drive off to work. So Thursday morning comes, metal detector gets there, raid my wife's jewelry box, because I don't have any gold or silver. So I put that out on the coffee table and okay, I know how this thing works, put all the jewelry back. And then I go outside, I'm walking down the driveway, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna find these keys, right? Walk all the way down the driveway, no keys. So I'm thinking, wow, this is really bad, So I'm thinking, I left the house, and my truck was parked over here, and I had my bow and my pack and my keys and my gloves and everything, and I walked to my truck, and I didn't walk down the driveway. I walked across the snow, and I looked across the snow, 10 feet away from me, there's my keys. So now I'm standing here with this very expensive metal detector that's never been used. I got to find a reason why I bought this thing, right? So, how did I get involved in archaeology and local history? I lost my keys. Probably, Paul, is this the reason you got into archaeology?
I think it might have been the fossil hunting.
Okay, all right. We all have our own path, some more scenic than others. So in the spring, I go walking around our yard, and I started poking around by the house, and of course, what do you think I found? Pull tabs from beer cans, aluminum foil, pie tins, little, junk pieces of flashing from when they put the gutters on the house, things like that. I thought, this is what metal detecting is all about. I spent a lot of money, to learn that. So I started moving out further and further away from the house, and you can kind of see the house is way in the back here, and this is a garden shed up in here. The house is back there. And when I got to this tree here, is when I found this little brass wick adjuster from an oil well lamp, and it was buried 6 inches deep at the base of this tree. And you can see that this is right on the edge of our vegetable garden, which also is an important part of the story. But I found this here, and I was looking around going, this is odd, right? Because 100 years ago, 150 years ago, this had all just been a forest, and why would there be an oil lamp in this area? So this is what the veg garden normally looks like in the summer, and I like to joke that my wife is an archaeologist too, because she likes to dig things out of the dirt, but she likes her artifacts to be only a few months old and edible. So here we are harvesting peanuts one year. We like to grow peanuts. They actually grow pretty well here. And so we had this conversation with my wife about, honey, I found this old oil lamp thing. I'd like to dig up part of the veg garden and see if I can find some more old trash. And that leads me to the next chapter of this story, which is, how I decided to go digging at the farthest part of the yard away from the vegetable garden. So, reasoning that a peaceful marriage is way more important than a potential amateur archaeological dig, I decided, wisely, to go take my metal detector down by the well. Okay? So a well is normally a point where there's a whole lot of activity going on, and so I moved down there with the metal detector, turned it on, and there were targets everywhere. Now, unfortunately, they're all rusty iron targets, which means, you know, nails and bits of tractor and farm trash and things like that. But there was a whole lot of stuff there, and so I started digging these little holes. And usually, metal detectorists are really picky about their holes. They want to, you know, metal detectorists normally don't dig on their own land; they dig on somebody else's land. So they're very careful about how they leave the land. You should generally leave no trace that you've been there and have been digging. So we have these very special shovels. I actually call myself a metal detectorist now. So special shovels like this, and what you do is you dig a circular plug like that, and you pull up this plug, and then you take a smaller metal detector and you look to see if there's anything in the plug, and you break apart the plug and you find whatever it is that set off your metal detector, and then you very carefully push all the dirt back in the hole, and you put the sod back how it was, and you put your foot on it to make sure it's nice and firm. So when a metal detectorist leaves an area, you should not be able to tell that they've been there digging. But what I was finding here was when I was looking for nails in these holes, occasionally there would be some red rocks, and some of these red rocks had flat sides, and they were cut square. And I dug a bunch of these holes, and when I had some of them, like 3 holes in a line, and they all had these funny shaped red rocks in them, even I can connect those dots. You know, it looked like there were actually bricks here. And so after several summers of digging, we found there's actually a building foundation here. It looks like there was actually you know, a brick wall. This is the foundation for an old building. So that was kind of interesting. So you know, looking for nails, find a building. So about that time, I was finding, you know, things that most people would call trash. You know, there's a whole bunch of square nails here, broken china, some pottery, broken glass, and this is actually pieces of slate and a button. This is kind of stuff I was finding, but my in-laws, you remember Paul and Katie from the first picture, were visiting one time, and they're in the house, and I was down at the end of the yard on my hands and knees digging in the dirt. Not that those two statements are correlated in any way, this is just an observation. I was getting some teasing about, you know, spending a lot of my discretionary time digging up somebody else's trash from 150 years ago. But fortunately, at the end of that particular day, I dug up this little item and came up to the house, and I said, oh, they said, what did you find? And I showed them all the trash first, and here, you know, I got a bunch of broken glass and some rusty nails. And then I showed them this thing, and we all looked at it and said, huh, what is that? So I got on the internet, and it took me about 10 minutes to figure out that this is a Civil War artifact from the 69th Irish Brigade out of New York. And I showed this to a number of archaeologists, and they've all assured me that it's actually an authentic one. You can get reproductions of these on the internet for Civil War reenactors, but this is an actual authentic item. And it's curious, you know, that this would end up buried in my yard. So we started looking at plat maps and things, and you can see that the 1890 plat map shows the owner of the land was James McDonald. And if you look at the census, this is the 1880 Verona census. James McDonald was a farmer, and he was actually an immigrant from Ireland, which is pretty interesting. So the next thing I did was I tried to find a roster for the 69th Irish Brigade, and here's an excerpt from that roster which shows there was a James McDonald there. Now I'm not going to claim that that's the same James McDonald. We haven't gone through all the records to tie those two people together, but it is a pretty interesting coincidence. So about that time, one of the other interesting intact items that I found, you know, I'm trying to skip most of the broken glass and broken china, but this is an intact item. This is a fruit jar lid, and this is how that type of lid was typically used. There's a bail that goes across the top with a little screw that holds the lid tight down on the jar. And the reason I'm showing this one is because this mark in the center, this is from the Hero Glass Works company, and they change their marks all the time. This particular mark was only used between 1880 and 1883. So that helps us to narrow down the dates of when that site might have been in use. So now we've got a few interesting artifacts. I've been taking these things to work and showing my coworker Dawn. And she was getting very excited about this. Oh, we have to start looking through the historical records. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So fortunately, Dawn has many years of experience doing this, and she really has a passion for genealogy. So she showed me how to start looking for records, and she did a whole bunch of independent research on her own. So we started learning about the people who lived at this site and the people who owned the land at the time. So what you see here is section 35 of the Verona Township plat maps from both 1873 and 1890. And you can see the little red circle over on the left one is where J.D. Gurney had a building. And interestingly, we don't find any records of J.D. Gurney actually living in Verona. J.D. Gurney was a wealthy landowner who lived on Gilman Street in Madison between a judge and a doctor. But he doesn't seem to have lived in Verona. He just owned the land for a while. And then in 1890, you can see that the building has moved away from PB. We saw this. We originally thought that this might just be a mistake in the map, but you can see the movement of that building is actually quite significant. So we got into researching that a little bit further. A little bit more about J.D. Gurney. It's probably too small for you to see. He comes from a family who were known as prominent residents and landowners in New York. He is described as a future distinguished Madison citizen. His grandfather entertained Revolutionary War General Lafayette at his home for 6 weeks. Okay, and let's see, J.D. Gurney studied law at Princeton University and got a degree in 1854, and came to Madison in 1857, and he spent many years investing large sums of money in real estate. So that's J.D. Gurney, what we know about J.D. Gurney. James MacDonald, on the other hand, was a poor immigrant farmer from Ireland. So you can see that these two people, their families, are likely not running in the same economic circles. And the reason I point this out is because the artifacts that have been found at this site are quite divergent in what they show about the level of wealth of the individual families. We find some things that are consistent with the poor farmstead families, and the other things that are more consistent with a wealthier, fancy family. So I'll show you some of those items in a minute. So now that we know that there's two sites, I got to find that second site, right? Because it's a mystery. So I go back up here to where I found this wick adjuster. I had scaled the plat maps, calculated the latitude and longitude, plugged the coordinates in my GPS, went walking around my yard, and what it led me to, you can probably imagine, was that the McDonald site is somewhere right there, half inside, outside the veg garden. So this goes back to the early conversation of, honey, can I dig up veg garden? So I took my Bobcat outside the veg garden. I figured I better make sure there's actually something here before we approach that subject again. So I scraped an area clean and started looking for targets with my trusty metal detector, and found that there were metal targets all over the place, and started digging things up. And first day of digging, well, you can see it's mostly early 20th century. Again, I'm going to use the word trash, but somebody that left behind these things. But there are two items here. There's a belt buckle here, which could be older, and there's a square nail up here behind this shotgun cap. But most of the stuff looks fairly modern. But there were still some targets that I hadn't dug up yet, so I kept digging, and with my little metal detectorist shovel here, made my little plug, pulled up the plug, and broke open the plug, and in one shovelful, one plug, I found 3 square nails and 3 pieces of a clay pipe. So, okay, there was something here. And the other interesting thing is that those 3 clay pipe pieces, they actually fit together. So it's possible that pipe was actually dropped there intact and broke apart later on. And I don't know if you can read this, but right here it says Germany on the clay pipe. So that was quite an interesting find. So now I've got a choice, right? I've got this upper site, which is, sort of 1880s, 1890s. I've got the lower site, which we don't know how old it is, but has yielded some really interesting artifacts. So where do I spend my time? So I decided to go down and spend a lot of time on the lower side, reasoning that there's a well down there, and it could potentially be older, so it could be more interesting. So I'll show you some of the artifacts that I've located on the lower site. You can see here's a box with 700 square rusty nails, and here's another box with 1,000 pieces of broken glass, and a lot of china. Now, the china is interesting because there's a pattern. A lot of this is stencilware of various types, so you'll see various colorful patterns on it, and the backside can actually have maker's marks on them, and so you can actually get some useful information about the dating, the history based on that. And of course there's a box of animal bones too. And these are bits of tractor and farm trash, old door hinges, and lots of miscellaneous things. But this is the typical stuff that I was finding at the time. So how does the digging go? Well, you just don't go down there with a shovel and start digging a hole. This is put some good knee pads on, and you're on your hands and knees, and you're taking your favorite trowel and you're just dragging it sideways across the ground, removing about 1/16 of an inch of dirt at a time until you see something that doesn't really look like a rock. It looks a little bit different. And if you're very careful and you gently move the dirt away, you are sometimes rewarded with a very interesting artifact. That one is actually right here. I can show you.
Cool.
Another little clay pipe piece. And this is the collection of other clay pipe pieces. And originally, before I started this project, I used to think, oh, clay pipes, that's like Revolutionary War stuff. And it turns out that clay pipes were in use from the late 1500s, actually up until the early part of the 20th century, although that's pretty uncommon. But I guess the point is that during the 1800s, they were quite common. In case people aren't familiar with clay pipes, you can see that a lot of them have this little tab here, and this was because the clay pipes were often located in a tavern. They were on a rack. You could purchase the use of a clay pipe, and one of the reasons that you find them broken into segments like this is not only because they were fragile, but also because after one person used this unglazed clay pipe for a while, the spit from your mouth makes the clay all kind of slimy, and they would break the end off, and so the next guy would have fresh, clean clay pipe, right? And so that's how they were used. They actually started out about that big, and they would get shorter and shorter as they got used. In all these pictures of the finds that I'm showing you, there's a 6-inch steel ruler and a quarter. Neither of those were found on the site. Those are for scale. So there's various ways that people have tried to look at the geometry of these clay pipes and understand what the age is, and at least with a certain style or series of clay pipes, this may work reasonably well. There's theories about the diameter of the stem or the concentricity between the hole and the stem, but this particular guide looks at the shape of the bowl, and I have two bowls, one full, one partial, and you can see that it's closest to this little one down here, although the angle isn't quite right. This is more perpendicular. This one's more at an angle, but that's the closest match, and that one says 1820 to 1860, but it's likely the ones I have are just slightly later than that. So as far as personal items go, does anyone recognize what these are? Anyone want to guess? Harmonica, very good. Yeah, these are reed plates from a harmonica. The rest of the harmonica is all weathered away, but that's what's left there. This little item here is a marble. And this, Paul, you said that might be a natural concretion of iron. You've seen those
Yeah,
before?
it could be. It's an oddie. Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah, so that's sort of an odd item. And then there's some combs up here, and this is a skeleton key and a little bell. Got the bell right here. But there's some really weird things too. So this is a carved ring, either made of glass or agate. Very uncommon to find this on a mid-19th century farmstead. And this is also one of these odd things that I've been assured you never find on a poor farming land. This is actually a set of cufflinks. So some weird things there. And this is actually kind of peculiar as well. This is actually a globe of the world. Here. It's a tiny little thing. And this I found halfway between the two sites, the McDonald and the Fuller site. And normally you'd think something this size might be from a charm bracelet. This is made of some lead alloy. It's very dense. There's no hole. There's no hook. There's no way to mount it. It's just a little globe of the world. So it's been suggested this might be a trinket from one of the World's Fairs. And I've searched through every picture I can find of World Fair souvenirs and can't find anywhere. But if anybody has any other ideas, I'd really be happy to hear them, because that one is a real mystery to us. It may not be that old, but it's still really interesting. We've dug up quite a bit of utensils. Let's see, so in the upper left, the circle of 3 spoons, at least 2 of those are from the same set. And the interesting thing here is that the top one, you can see, still has silver plating on it. So very unlikely that a poor farm family would have a set of silver spoons, or that they would throw out a set of silver spoons. And indeed, we have here a set of plated silver spoons. In the center there, you see 2 tined forks. These are either very old, 1840s-ish, or they could have been special purpose forks, like for pickles or maybe oysters. And then in the upper right corner is a portion of 2 spoons. This is mid-19th century. This is either pewter or Britannia metal. You wouldn't want to use these spoons today because the alloy contains a whole lot of lead. So I think this is the most interesting slide. I know it may not look like it to you right now, but I'm going to tell you a story about all these pieces, and I think I'll be able to convince you. This slide alone has in it very strong support for both the age and the occupation of the people who are at this site. So first of all, this upper left piece is a piece of coal, actual unburned piece of coal. And farmhouses at the time did not heat their homes with coal. They actually were heated with wood. But blacksmith forges did use coal. You need the coal to get the hotter fire in a blacksmith forge. And indeed, these lower 4 pieces are what we call clinkers. You've probably heard of clinkers. This is the unburned impurities that are always present in a coal seam. And so when you have the coal burning in the forge, the stuff that doesn't burn eventually turns into this little hard rock that just clinks around inside the forge. So on the left side, you've got unburned coal and you've got clinkers, which are very, very strong indications that there was a blacksmith forge on this site. On the right side, the bottom 3 pieces there are small chunks of lead. And I've got probably 6 or 8 pieces. They're always this size. So I don't think that they were used as water piping. It's actually a little chunk of lead that somebody had for specific purpose. In the upper corner, these are pieces of lead that have been melted. So why is this significant? Prior to the Civil War, everybody melted their own lead to make musket balls, right? And then during the Civil War, rifle cartridges became ubiquitous. And so the presence of melted lead on these farmsteads completely goes away. So if you see melted lead at one of these sites, you know that there was people occupying that site prior to the Civil War. So here we have the occupation, and we have a good signpost for the age of this site. So if you go back and look at the ownership records, we based this off of mostly plat maps, but a few other sources. You can see on the left side that Eliphalet Fuller owned the land from 1850, and then Joseph Flick owned the land in 1861. So here you have a pre-Civil War and during the Civil War ownership of the land. And also the records show that Joseph Flick was the first blacksmith in the township of Verona. So here we have occupation and age confirmed by what looked like just some boring rocks. So this is Bryce digging up a bottle during our last work party. And it's always exciting to get a fully intact bottle out because, most of the time, well, 99.9% of the time, what you're digging up is broken glass. But when you do find a full bottle, it's always very exciting. We have got quite a few bottles, but we have not done all the research on these yet. As I said, this is an ongoing project. And so we don't know the ages of these bottles yet, but they're likely in line with the rest of the artifacts that we're digging out. These are some of the fruit jar lids, and in the bottom section here's the Hero Glassworks. This is a consolidated fruit jar company, and then there's 3 other ones that don't have marks, but it is also pretty exciting to find completely intact fruit jar lids at this site. These are what we think are oil lamp pieces, although the one in the top center here looks like a little hinged cap, and this was also silver plated, so a pretty fancy piece of equipment. Lots of buttons, and it may be hard to tell in this picture, but the last 3 over here are actually 3 different materials. There's white glass, there's porcelain, and there's bone. And so these different materials were used, depending on how fancy the clothes were, and they ranged from very poor work clothes to very fancy dress clothes. The interesting part here is that there's 2 very difficult to see pieces. I've got a better slide of that coming up. This is a piece of black glass jewelry. Looks just like this, and it has a little bit of curve to the back, and I found 2 pieces like this. They're broken along the top edge. They don't fit together, so there's at least one more piece out there buried in the dirt taunting me. I'll have to find next year. We don't know what it is. It's one of those mysteries. This is about half of the buckles that we've located, and they range again from very utilitarian work buckles that are fairly sturdy to these very delicate, fancy and dress type buckles. I've got this one in one of the cases here. You can take a look at it later, but it looks like it's either from a sash, could be a military dress uniform, or perhaps from a woman's fancy dress. We don't know exactly. I have not been able to find any historical information on that, but it's clearly not a work buckle from your farm gear. So again, there's a dichotomy there between the different economic classes of the people that lived at the site. Lots and lots of nail-like objects. Paul, you thought that this one here might be from a blacksmith's vise, post vise?
Right.
Post vise.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So here we have more confirmation that there was indeed a blacksmith likely at this site. And I'm just going to point out here that some of these are what are known as hand-wrought nails. These were made by a guy banging on hot steel with a forge on an anvil. And so you can see that the sides of them are not straight, and the heads are somewhat misshapen. This is common for these hand-wrought nails. And then other ones that are a little bit later are machine-made. So they were cut by a machine. They have much straighter sides, and you can see that the undercut on the head is actually quite crisp. So these are made by machine. Paul, do you know about approximately the age transition between the hand-wrought and the machine-made nails?
I put it somewhere in the kind of the 1840s.
1840s.
You really start to see the machine-made nails becoming so available that they overshadow the hand-wrought. But it's a kind of walking transition depending on where you are and access to markets and all that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so sort of mid-1800s is what it looks like for the transition there. Lots of other iron oddities. You see there's 3 axe heads here. There's a cutting blade of some sort in the middle, scissors, and I'm gonna make a really poor pun here. This is an iron, so it's an iron. It's the best I could do. I was really surprised to find pieces of slate. They're very thin, but they're obviously pieces of slate. And I've been told by the professionals that it was very common to find slate at these mid-19th century farmsteads because they were used for writing practice for the children. So wherever there were children around, you would find these slate pieces. The interesting thing is that they didn't use chalk. We always associate slate and chalk. They use what are called slate pencils, and these little horizontal things at the top, these are or what's left of a slate pencil. I assume that they were larger when they were in use. But if you rub that on the slate piece, it looks like just a very, very fine chalk line, and so very useful to use that. The interesting thing is that at the top here is a little piece of slate pencil that has been hand carved into the shape of a fish, an arrowhead. We don't know. But this was something that, somebody had this cool idea of something they could do, and they executed this plan, and this is a completely unique item that belonged to somebody who lived there. While we're on the subject of slate, I wanted to mention that Verona Schoolhouse number 6 is about 300 yards to the south of where this dig site is. And from the historical records that we've been able to find, it doesn't appear that there was a well at this site. Do you know if there was a well by the schoolhouse?
We don't know much about this.
Okay.
The burn down.
Okay, so one of the things that we read was that the students and the teachers from the school would come down and use the wells. This was common for, if the school did not have a well, they would go to the closest well at some local farmstead. So it could have been the well that we've dug up on our yard. So another good reason to get to the bottom of that well and see what's down there. I have found one item that we think is a Native American artifact. Paul has identified this as some sort of cutting tool, and the reason we know that this is man-made is because this type of material, which is galena chert, is normally a light gray in color. But the Indians figured out a long time ago that if you wanted to work this stone, you could anneal it in the fire, made it much easier to work. And when you do that, the very small amounts of iron in this material oxidize and turn the stone pink. So I'll have this one on display in the case later. You can take a look at it too. Lots and lots of broken ceramic. Very few pieces intact, but we have been able to identify and put dates on some of these things in the lower left. This is called sprigware, and it dates back to the 1840s, and they call it sprigware because it has little paintings of sprigs of different types of plants on it. There's some yellowware and banded ware, and in the top there's Rockingham ware, which was popular between 1840s and 1900s, and also some galena ware and redware, which also was popular between 1840 and 1900. So this all confirms the dates that we're looking at for some of these artifacts and when the site was occupied. There's two very interesting pieces in the middle here. The first one has the mark J.C. Fairchild Madison. Does anybody know who J.C. Fairchild was?
Was he a mayor of Madison?
Excellent, excellent. Yes, J.C. Fairchild was the first mayor of Madison, but what most people don't know is that he was also an importer of Staffordshire china between 1846 and 1862, and it's very uncommon to actually find a piece of ceramic that has his mark on it. And the other little piece here, this little tiny fragment, is a piece of Pankhurst china, and the reason I'm showing it here is because this particular mark was only used between 1850 and 1852. So that really helps to pin down the date of some of this artifact. I think one of the most interesting pieces that's been uncovered is what's called a glass blob seal. It's also called an applied seal. This is a chunk of glass that is heated till it's soft and pressed into a wine bottle. This is what was used prior to paper labels becoming very common. You can see the back side of here. This layer of glass that you see is actually part of the bottle. Somebody chipped this seal off of the bottle very carefully and had it separate. There are no other pieces of the bottle that have been found at this site. And this is something that somebody was saving for a reason. So how old is this? You can see it says St. Julian in Medoc. Oh wait, Melissa? What's the proper? Medoc. Melissa's a PhD in French language and literature, so she's my local expert for how to pronounce this. Medoc? Did I do that? Okay, so Medoc is a peninsula in France. It's on the west side of France. This is where all the fancy Bordeaux wines come from, and wines have been made there since the early 1700s. And St. Julian is one of the appellations that's found in that area. But I've been trying to find, let's see, this is showing you how the glass seal is applied. You can see that this is pushed onto the shoulder of the bottle. On some bottles, it's actually on the cylindrical part. Sometimes it's on the shoulder. But this is how the winemakers would mark their particular type of wine. I've been searching around trying to find this exact seal and what the age might be. There is one that says St. Julian Medoc that was found at the Thomas Jefferson estate, and this was only used on the 1788 vintage. And if you had to guess which one of these was older, I think I would guess that one there. There's another one that's very similar to it, which was found in 2008 in Mobile, Alabama. There was a dig going on at the Spring Hill Jesuit College, and there's a very interesting and lengthy report. I think it's about 430 pages that shows a tremendous number of artifacts that were dug up, but it doesn't give a date for this particular artifact. Recently, I did find one that a seller was claiming. This is also a St. Julian seal. They claim it's from 1820. So you can put your own estimate on what you think the age is of this thing, but it's actually, it appears to be quite old, and it may predate the rest of the things on the site by possibly 100 years. So why would that be there? One of the theories that we have is that the J.D. Gurney family, the Princeton-educated lawyer, this may be a memento from some important family event that they were keeping as a keepsake and had on display in their house. But who knows? That's just a theory. Maybe someday we'll find out more about it. So the most recent work that we've done, we've been trying to locate the east wall of the site. We found the other three walls, trying to figure out exactly how big this building was. There's some historical document that said that the Flick owner had stage horses. PB has been historically one of the major north-south roads for a very, very long period of time. Bob Rigo, your family has been on PB for how many generations?
Since 63.
63, okay. Eric, your son Eric, had mentioned to me one time that he said, my grandfather remembers when this was just gravel and there were horse and buggies, and when they pulled out of the driveway, they'd never even look both ways because there was no reason to. But that has been a road that people used to go north and south for many, many years, and the stage horses are an interesting aspect of the research. But the building that we've uncovered so far is pretty small. We'd like to establish that how big it actually was to see if it makes sense that travelers were stopping there. So Paul Reckner and two of his colleagues came out to the site in the fall, and we were looking for the east wall and looking for the privy and a couple of other things. We all picked out what we thought was the perfect privy site, and we did a bunch of core drillings and came up with nothing. And then we all looked around the yard and said, well, okay, if it's not there, then it must be over there, and did more core drillings and found nothing again. The reason the privy is of interest to us is because privies can be a gold mine for historical artifacts. You know, sometimes people, when they go in the privy, they pull their pants down, they drop some coins, right? Or you know, you're drinking your little flask of whiskey, and somehow the flask of whiskey ends up at the bottom of the privy, either intentionally or not. But historically, they've been great places to find historical artifacts, and so we'd really like to figure out where the privy was, but we haven't located it yet. Anyway, the little red ellipse here is an area where we did a pretty extensive dig to try and establish where this east wall was, and it turned out that it was inconclusive, but it was an extremely prolific area. In fact, this is the artifacts that we dug up in about a 4-hour period. So we haven't even started going through to establish, you know, dates and things on these, but just incredibly prolific. So back to the original timeline and overview. Instead of looking at things that we did, I'm going to now show you things that we found. So there's the well with the young stepsons, the pump, my keys, that's really important, which of course led to everything else. That was the first artifact, the wick adjuster, the 69th Irish Brigade pin, the J.C. Fairchild and Pankhurst china fragments, the little slate pencil, individual wood carving, the glass blob seal, the globe, who knows what that's for, and lots of clay pipe pieces. So this is where we're at. As I said, this is an ongoing project, but I did want to mention some people who have contributed significantly to the project. Paul Reckner, of course, who you know from the Wisconsin Historical Society, and also his colleagues. Whoops, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. Katie Bindley and Caston Mathaney also came out to help dig. Bob Birmingham, he's the retired state archaeologist with the Wisconsin Historical Society. He went through a lot of my artifacts early on and helped me out with information. My coworker, Dawn Stencil, who has done an incredible amount of document research, and of course, the two little boys that I got to send down the well all the time because they're not my kids, right? And Bryce has taken an interest in digging at the site too, and my wife Maya, who patiently tolerates my digging holes in the yard. I have one request for everybody here. If anyone has any photos or historical documents that might show some of these areas, please, I would love to see them. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. If there's questions, feel free to ask, and if they're really hard, then I'm going to delegate them to Paul. Yes.
I was curious where most of the nice artifacts, like in a spot where they would have kind of thrown it there, just all over.
No, they're sort of spread out over the whole. Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. The question is, were the nice artifacts located? Were they localized into one particular area? And the answer is they're spread out over the entire expanse of the building. So the majority of the artifacts that I've shown are all from basically within the confines of those walls, maybe within a foot outside, with the exception of the little globe, which I found halfway up the hill, and some of the pipe pieces and nails were found at the McDonald's site. But other than that, they were sort of spread out. And in fact, those two little black jewelry pieces, they were like 10 feet apart from each other, which just, blew my mind. The iron, I found the iron one year, and I thought, oh, there's got to be a handle for this iron, right? And so it took me till the next season. I found the handle for the iron, and it was actually, 5 or 10 feet away. So, yeah, it looks like probably, people were dumping their trash, over the years. This became a garbage dump at some point, probably when the McDonald home was built up on top of the hill. Then the lower site became their trash dump. So we find, mix of things all over the place. Other questions? Oh, sure.
Do you know when or why the houses were just demolished and covered with dirt?
The question is, when or why was the house demolished and covered with dirt? I don't. Between 1873 and 1890, the Gurney house just disappears from the map, but we don't have any other information on that. Josh?
Yeah, so who was first, the lawyer or the farmer?
The question is, who was first, the lawyer or the farmer? From the maps we have, the lawyer owned the land on the 1873 plat map. The farmer owned it on the 1890 plat map, but there's actually a Verona census that showed that the farmer, James McDonald, owned the land in 1880. That's as close as we can get right now. Back? Sir,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yes, we live right across the road from you. We'd like to meet you someday.
Yes.
But that's not what the question's about.
Okay.
Our 5 acres is off the same farm that Bob Rigo has. Have you discovered what would have been happening across the road from your location during these years that as you just stumble through all this, would you have just seen something happen across the road, or?
Sure, the question is, what was going on across the road from the site where we've been digging? At one time, we had some historical documents that showed that the son of, correct me if I'm wrong in this, Dawn, I think there was the son of one of the owners lived across the street, and there was a building that was shown over there, and we had some indication that that might be where the blacksmith shop was, but since we found the coal on this side of the road, we think the blacksmith shop was here, but we really need to do more digging into the records to pin that down. Yeah, I'd love to meet you and talk about stuff that was going on in your land.
Thank you.
Other questions? Back there?
I live in a farmhouse as well on Lacey Road, and I had the same situation where the plat maps show a house in a spot that's fairly close to it, but it doesn't overlap on the different different sequential plat maps. So how do I find out if they're if the house is the same and it's just inaccurate, or if there really was?
Right. Okay, so the question is, if you look at old plat maps and you find that the building has moved a little bit, how do you figure out what the right position is or what the right building is? I don't know the answer to that question. Dawn and I have talked about that a little bit. One of the things that we're planning on doing is going through the actual deed, which will show the complete succession of ownership. The plat maps were only done once every, 10 years or something, and so there could have been multiple changes of ownership, and the deed may pin that down a little bit more accurately, but I haven't confirmed that yet on our land.
And I also brought in some bags of artifacts that I've found we've lived there for more than 30 years. And they were found at all different depths and in, farther away from the house.
Excellent. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
They're
Come on up after the talk
They
and
look like
we'll take a look
yours.
at that. This woman lives on Lacey Road. She has a bag of artifacts from things that have been found on her land. Always interesting. Other questions? Yes.
About how many artifacts have you found in total?
How many artifacts have I found in total? Okay, I've been told that broken glass, which I would call junk, I've been told by an archaeologist that I shouldn't call that junk, and broken china is not junk either. So if you count all the broken glass and all the broken china, we're probably looking at 3,000 pieces. I have bins and bins in my garage. So lots and lots of stuff. But I've got the cool stuff is up here you guys can take a look at later. Did anyone else have questions?
Did you find anything of any real value?
Anything of any real value? Well, it depends on how one defines value. Okay? So, worth more than $10. Actually, if you look on eBay, authentic 69th Irish Brigade pins sell for about $400. But yeah, that's the only thing of monetary value. Certainly we have lots of things of historical value. No. And the one ring I did find was only half a ring, and believe me, I looked really hard for the other half. Anyone else? Yes.
Further south from where you live, there's a road called Remy Road. I don't know.
Remy Road, yes.
If you're familiar, but
Yes,
there is a guy by the name of Jerry Remy that lives there,
yes.
and there's a spring out just maybe a couple hundred yards away from his house.
A spring,
And
okay.
he said, way back when the Indians were around, they would come up from the southwest, and they'd stop at that spring for a resting place, and get water, whatever they needed, and then they would go on from there to the big waters, which is now what we call Madison.
Wow.
And there's farmers out there yet today that are still finding arrowheads
Wow. On Remy Road.
from those, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody can hear it. The gentleman is saying that on Remy Road there was a spring, and the farmers there are saying they would find arrowheads. The Indians would come there to get water before they went on to the big lakes in Madison.
Yeah.
Do you know about what year this was
No,
that they were doing this?
I don't know what the year was.
Interesting. There's so much history in this area. I've just been really surprised to find what's going on, sometimes right under our noses. So,
Where are you going to build your museum?
where am I going to build a museum? I think I have to discuss that with my wife first. She usually has some input onto what things get moved around on the land. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today.